Alright, so I've covered polyfills for debouncing, throttling, and a few array methods up until now. One more native method polyfill that's commonly asked in interviews is the bind method polyfill. So bind is actually closely tied with the this keyword in JavaScript. When you execute a function in JavaScript, the function has a certain context in which it executes. If the function is an object's method, then the object is the context. If it's a free function invocation, meaning there's no object behind the function invocation, then in that case, the window object is the context, at least for browsers. It's literally an object just like anything else in JavaScript. The only problem is that when you try to access this keyword inside a function, sometimes it's not what you expect. There's like 10 different scenarios where this keyword behaves differently based on how you invoke it, and that's exactly what this bind method aims to solve. The bind method will fix a value of this keyword to a function and return that function instance. Now anytime you call this function instance, this value inside that function will always be the same. So I have this example here with 3 objects. All 3 objects have the first name, the last name, and the sayname method. Instead of recreating the sayname method for all 3 objects, I created once at the top here and passed the reference around to the other 2 objects. So you can see here that I'm using the same function gym.sayname in both of these objects. I also have a free function here that points to the same method. Now take a guess as to what these 3 console log statements would print. The first 2 would print their respective full names, and the third one would just print undefined. That's because this keyword changes depending upon the way you call the function. Someone who's new to JavaScript may not know why this happens. A way to fix this though is by binding the value of this to what you want. If you want gym.sayname to print gym helper everywhere, you have to bind the sayname method to the gym object. So then the gym object, this object, will basically be this keyword everywhere. Currently there's no binding, and hence it changes based on the way it's invoked. So right below the gym object, I'll use the native bind method. I want to bind the gym object as the sayname method's this keyword. So this bind method will always be called on a function as we are binding an object to this function. If the sayname function has additional parameters, we can pass them after this object. So if at all the sayname function has something in here, we can simply pass it after what's supposed to be this keyword. So this first parameter is going to be this keyword, and the second one is going to be whatever parameters you want to pass to this sayname function. Now all the instances of gym.sayname can be replaced with this bound function. So let me just copy this and replace it with gym.sayname. Now if I go back to the browser, you'll see that it gives me the same result no matter how it's invoked. So that's what bind aims to achieve. Now coming to the polyfill, it's actually pretty easy now that we know how it works. We attached our array polyfills to the arrays prototype. This time, we'll attach our polyfill function to the function prototype. So at the top, let me attach our polyfill to the function prototype. I'll call it custom bind. This takes in this keyword or the object to which we want to bind our function, and the rest of the parameters on that function. Inside the function, I'll return another function. If you notice, the bind native method, this method, actually returns a function with a fixed context. So we also need to return a function. So anytime we run our custom bind method, this inner function's reference will be returned, and we'll store it inside a variable just like we did over here. One can also pass in arguments to this bound function. So I can actually do something like this. So the parameters that we want to pass to this function comes from here. Now comes the tricky part. The function on which we call our custom bind method, so you can imagine this to be the function, we need to bind the object that we pass as the first argument to the function. So this is the object that we pass in to the bind method. This object gets bound to the function on which we are running the bind method. Now to access that function inside our polyfill, we'll make use of this keyword. Now this keyword inside this parent function scope, not this inner function, but this parent function, that this keyword basically points to the function on which we are going to run the custom bind method. So you can just imagine this bind to be custom bind. And whatever we are passing before this custom bind method is what's going to be the this keyword inside this parent function scope. So if I try to access this over here, it's going to point to gym.cname. Now I need to access this keyword inside this inner function. So what I'll do is I'll simply create a variable, and inside that variable I'll store the this context. Inside the inner function, all I need to do is return the result of this function invocation, but this function should be invoked with the context set to this object. And the way we do it is by using the call method, which is a native JavaScript method. So I'll simply return the function that I get from here. I'll apply the call method, and this call method takes in the this argument as its first parameter. So it is basically going to call this function, but it's going to set the context of this function, the this keyword, to whatever I pass in inside here as the first parameter. So all we need to do here is simply get this object and pass it inside here. After that, we need to pass in the rest of the arguments. So that's again pretty straightforward. I'll spread the outer arguments and then the inner arguments. I could have used an arrow function here for this inner function. Arrow functions basically use the this value from the parent scope when they are created. So it would have made things simpler. But since arrow functions were introduced a lot later, it would not make sense to use a newer API in a polyfill. Polyfills are a fallback for older browsers when a new API does not provide support for those browsers. So I'll stick to this implementation, but I could have simply done this and it would have still worked the same. So let me just go back to the browser and see if I get something else. Yeah, I accidentally called the function here. Yeah, you'll see that we get the same result as expected. So let's go through the flow one more time. Just like I did in the previous videos with the array polyfills, I attach the polyfill here to the function prototype. So now any function instance that gets created in the future will also have access to this custom bind method. I pass the object that gets bound to the function as the first parameter, and then I spread the rest of the additional params. I store the value of the this keyword to a variable. That's because I need this inside this inner function. Inside this inner function, the value of the this keyword changes, and I need access to the this keyword inside this outer function scope. That's because this points to the function on which we are running the custom bind method. So basically gym.cname. So that's the reason why I save it here so that I can pass it inside the inner function. Then I return this inner function. Inside this function, I also pass in the extra arguments that can be passed to the return function. So if I want to pass some arguments to this bound function, I can do that and it can be accessed from this inner arguments. Finally, all I do is use the call method that's present on the function prototype. This call method takes in the object or the this keyword or the context as its first parameter. So basically this function will always be invoked with the object that we pass in as its context. Doesn't matter whether it's freely invoked or a different object is set as its context, it's always going to give you the same result. So that was a quick video on the bind method and its polyfill. It's a pretty common interview question and I hope this in-depth tutorial made sense. We'll be looking at a few more polyfills in the coming videos, so do subscribe for that. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.